Hi, welcome to my podcast, Becoming a Cut Flower Grower. I'm your host, Lydia, and I'm here to share my year of growing and selling cut flowers. I'll be giving you the lowdown on everything I'm doing and sharing all the highs and lows, the good times and the inevitable disasters, all in real time. Join me on my cut flower journey, starting right now. Hello and welcome to the latest episode. It is Friday, the 13th of February 2026. I don't know if Friday the 13th is a bad luck or a good luck day for you, but I've always historically thought about it as a good luck day. So I hope it has been for you today. Now, I'm just going to jump straight in with tonight's episode. I've got some reflections for you on the last episode, all about pricing part 1. And then in tonight's episode, I've got some practical ways that you might want to copy from me. So I'll tell you what I did in 2025, which was year 1 for me. And then in the second part of the episode, I'm going to continue the plant profile series with Craspedia. So let's get started. I hope the last episode was of interest for you. I hope it didn't actually just make you really depressed and think, I just don't even know where to start with all of this, because I get it. I've been there. And it is really, really difficult in year 1. It's not wildly easier in year 2, to be honest, because I didn't collect enough data and I'm still very much learning. But I thought when I listened back to the episode, I thought, I'm not sure it's actually practical enough about what I did. And if you're in the same position, maybe you're a year 1 grower, or maybe you're starting to even think about growing and you think, well, what do I actually do in my first year? So let me share with you what I did. Well, I did masses and masses of research. You won't be surprised to hear this. I had an absolute rifle around online to see if I could find what other people were growing and charging. And it wasn't ideal at all. In fact, it's very, very far from ideal, but needs must in year 1. And I should say, I don't think I got it right. But this is the only way that I could think of to do it, because most of the information is just quite simply hidden from us, or not deliberately hidden either. It just isn't available. People are not sharing it. And one of the worst things I did was to benchmark a lot of my prices on the imports. Now, you'll hear me railing against imports all the time, and it is not a good idea to benchmark your prices against imports for the reasons that I talked about in the last episode, which is they're growing on a vast scale, their labor costs are less than ours, and the land costs are less than ours. But what are you supposed to do if you're just starting out and you're growing all these stems and you literally don't have a clue how to price them? Now, once again, this really is from my own personal experience, and that is that I decided to sell wholesale to wedding and event florists because I didn't feel comfortable going straight into market. And what I seem to be seeing overwhelmingly is that people are going into retail situations first. So they're doing the opposite of what I'm doing. And that could be because I've made a terrible mistake, because it's so much harder to do it the way that I am doing it. It is easier, not to say it's easy, but easier if you're going to be selling directly to customers, because you can do so much market research about what is actually available to purchase. Whereas if you're trying to work out how to sell wholesale stems, there's just virtually no information whatsoever. So I did the real basics, like going around the supermarkets as well. Well, we know that supermarket pricing should not be included in this because it is a loss leader for the supermarkets, but you do have to start somewhere. Now, the thing in the supermarkets is that you can just go and stand there, pick the bunches out of the buckets, and literally count how many stems there are in each bunch. What sort of stems are they? So are they a single variety in one bunch, so a whole bunch of tulips or a whole bunch of narcissi, or are they the mixed bouquets, which are going to have different types of flowers in it, the fillers, the focals, the airy things, and also some foliage in there. But you can get an idea. You can either buy them, take them home, mess about with them, pull them to pieces, do all the sums in your head, write it all down, or you can just go through what's in the supermarket and get a rough idea of what's what. And you can do that over, a number of weeks, a number of months if you want to, so that you know what's coming in at different times of the year and how much they are being sold for. Now, you can also do this with florists. You can do this with florists that have got premises on the high street, and then those that have got premises on secondary or tertiary streets or in little squares or courtyards in your nearest town. Same kind of thing, a little bit trickier to stand there and write everything down that's in a bunch or a bouquet, because they'll probably wonder what on earth you're up to. But there's no harm in going to have a look and picking up some bunches and just seeing what kind of prices they're doing. Bearing in mind, of course, that their overheads may be very, very different from yours because they are a retail premises and they've got a whole shop to pay for and a whole team of staff and vans and everything else. So, as I say, if you just collect as many prices from as many different places, you might be able to come up with some kind of number. It will definitely help. It's what I did. Now, the prices of the wholesale import flowers are available on a number of websites. In fact, I think you and I could probably just order from those websites as well. But you can see for a whole range of different flowers what they are selling them for. Now, these are going to be single variety bunches. They might be in bunches of 10 or 20. For the smaller, more delicate things, there might even be bunches of 50. And you will be able to see exactly how much they're charging for that bunch of 10 or that bucket of 10. You'll also be able to see the stem lengths on there. Now, these are important. The wholesalers charge by the stem length as well. So you can see 3 or 4 different prices for the same flower depending on how long it is, how long the stem is. Now, you might be able to find some pricing from fellow growers. You might be able to go on the Flowers from the Farm website, find your local growers, go on all of their websites or their Instagrams and see what they are charging. Again, probably most likely that they are selling prearranged bouquets, so not necessarily single stem bunches, although at times of the year like dahlias, tulips, you might well find that they do that. But again, you have to remember that their costs of production are not going to be the same as yours. But if you go out and you collect all of this information, you will have a very rough idea of how much things cost from the very, very cheapest end to the most expensive end. And you will also need to take into account your local area. So I live in an area in the southeast, which is relatively prosperous, and I'm finding bouquets for sale in this area that would never sell in a million years in other parts of the country. So there's obviously that to take into account. So that gave me an idea of what the end product might cost. And again, it was broad numbers and it's not accurate data, but it gave me a very, very rough idea of what things would cost. Now, then I did my very basic cost calculations on things like how much the seed cost me and all the other materials that I used, because I grew everything, or nearly everything, not everything, but nearly everything from seed last year because I was on a really extreme budget. So things like seeds, trays, compost, labels, vermiculite, all the rest of it. I didn't actually calculate any of my indirect costs last year, and I'm ashamed to say, but I'll tell you honestly that I haven't actually calculated them for this year yet, but I will do it before I start selling. And if you remember, the indirect costs are the ones that are, generally speaking, kind of fixed, and they will remain the same every week, every month of the year, regardless of whether I set foot onto the field and sell anything or not. That's just literally the basics to kind of keep the roof on the field, if you like, the metaphor of keeping the roof on the house, but you get what I'm saying. Now, I didn't do enough calculations. I didn't collect enough data for growing last year. So I did some, and one of the first things I had to do was work out my hourly rate, which was a little bit tricky. And I very optimistically went for £20 an hour. I thought, yes, I can do that. I can charge that. So when I was doing the seed sowing, I would record how long it took me to do the whole batch of seed that I was doing that season or that year or whatever it was. So for a particular plant, I would just make a note every time I sowed that seed, how long did it take me? And then when I transplanted it out into the field, I made a note of how much time it took me to transplant it out. Now, some of the bed prep I'd done in 2024 and didn't need much work. I didn't record every single time that I weeded something or put any mulch down or staked it, which was a mistake. So the figures that I have for last year were not accurate, but they were a starting point at least. Now, some things I just saved lots of money on by not using trays, for example. So I went through a phase in 2024 of eating lots of chicken thighs. So I kept all of the trays. So I sowed a lot of my seed in these recycled plastic trays, and they were actually really brilliant. They were great and obviously free. You may have heard me mention that I recycle all of my compost. Now, I do start my compost out with real basic stuff, and I have a huge tub in my garden, and all the waste compost goes back into this tub, and every so often I give it a really good mix up, and then I use it for what else I need it for. Now, after I said something, I did an episode a couple of weeks ago, didn't I, about the Florette video where she's talking about the different types of compost and whatnot. So I'll talk about that in due course, because I want to do an experiment to see the difference between growing in really rubbish compost like I do and growing in something that's better quality and that's got loads of amendments in, and then I'll share that with you. But historically, I have always grown in totally rubbishy compost, and I've had a fantastic germination. The seeds don't need a brilliant compost to germinate, but they will start needing nutrition after that point. So there's a fine line to be struck, and I'm going to investigate that in more details, as I said. So I didn't have any compost costs, and I recycled all my labels, and I had vermiculite already sculling around in the greenhouse. But again, I should have costed it for how much I'd used, and I didn't, because that stuff is not cheap. So let me give you an absolutely concrete example with one plant that I grew last year. And that is my Cosmos apricot lemonade. And it was a new type of Cosmos. The color, I mean, was new for me last year, and I thought it looked absolutely stunning, and I was very excited about it. And I'll tell you the plot spoiler now. They were a complete disaster, and I made a loss on them. But let me talk you through the numbers to start with. So I worked out that it cost me 5 minutes of my time to sow all of these seeds in the packet, and it took me 15 minutes to plant them all out. Didn't do any staking, which in the end didn't matter because they were all stunted and hopeless. So that wasn't a problem on that particular occasion, which is a total of 20 minutes worth of labor. Now, as I say, this is a very quick and dirty way of doing this. And if you're an experienced grower listening to this, you're probably literally like curling your toes and crying slightly inside for me, because this is not, this is very, very basic, and I make no bones about it. I'm sharing this information with you, and I'll be upset if you laugh behind my back, but I can't help it if you're absolutely horrified by what I've done. So 20 minutes in order to do all of the labor for those bits. I didn't count the cost of the compost because it just is just sitting in that bin, and I didn't have to buy anything. If my hourly rate for this was £20, which it was, that is a production cost of £6.60 just to get those guys sown, germinated, and transplanted out into the field. The seed packet cost me £2.95, and that comes to a whopping great £9.55 that it cost me to produce these guys, and I got 30 plants as a result of it. Now, what I didn't do was record the total number of stems that I harvested from those 30 plants over the course of the season. And it was a disappointing season for them because we had heat waves, we had a drought. They were very, very unhappy. They got planted on the edge of the newly turf lifted area that Nigel did for me, and the soil had not been worked, and they were very unhappy. And despite the fact they were located right next to one of the water bowsers, I didn't water them very much because they just kind of came out of the gate looking a bit rubbish to start with. I spent most of the year blaming either the seed or the weather, but it could well have been me, to be honest. But either way, they were kind of sickly looking plants to start with, and I didn't have much hope for them. And when you don't have much water to go around, I'm afraid I made the judgment that the water needed to go on other things, because these guys just didn't look like they were going to do anything anyway. But it turned out kind of September-y time, as the temperatures started to drop, they really came into their own. And now what I know about them is that sounds exactly about right. So I planted them out when it was too hot for them. Didn't give them enough water, and they just spent the whole season absolutely hating me. And as a direct result of that, I hardly sold any stems. So if I tell you that I sold a whopping 6 stems from 30 plants, which is pretty appalling, I sold them for £1 each. And I cut them quite low to the base because at this point they were just not performing like they were supposed to. And there was no point trying to cut off these really short little stems. So I cut them really, really long, sold them for £1 each. So I made a profit of minus £3.55. And when I say profit, this is in the very loosest sense of the word, because I hadn't factored in my indirect costs, which is those for just keeping the place going. That's only based on my direct costs. So £6 worth of sales minus £9.55 to produce them is a whopping minus £3.55. So I actually made a loss on my Cosmos. What were they called? Apricot lemonade last year. Very, very disappointing. And this is, again, why the numbers are so important, because you have to understand how much it's cost you to make them and whether you're going to make any profit whatsoever. Now, if I contrast this with the hazel plants that I sold, now there were hazel shrubs on the plot. There's 3 of them, and they're monsters, absolute monsters. So I've been coppicing them down, but I didn't have any direct costs for them whatsoever because they were already in the ground and just doing their own thing. I don't have any indirect costs because I hadn't done them for the plot last year, but following my Jenny Marks course, I should be able to work all of that out. So essentially every stem or bucket, because I sold them by the bucket, was almost exclusively profit for the hazel because I didn't touch them. I didn't do anything. No seed sowing, no compost, no planting out, no nothing, absolutely nothing. I just literally grabbed a bucket, went out and cut them down, and they went off to be in a variety of urns outside churches. They went on mantelpieces. They went to a fantastic array of weddings last year. I was very envious, and every time I saw them in photographs on my wedding event florist's Instagram, I was like, oh my god, there's my hazel, they look amazing. They were beautiful. But that is the difference. Anytime you touch anything, there's an increased cost of production, and this is why shrubs are just so fantastic and why I have bought so many more of them over the autumn, because touching all of these annuals, unless you are very, very fast, unless you're using real economies of scale, can be very expensive to produce. So, having told you all of this, the answer in a real world situation, if you are a very, very beginner or just thinking about starting, is that estimates are the way to go. It's the only way to go at the moment, unfortunately. Estimates based on your market research. You've got to get out there. You've got to put the legwork in. You've got to get as many numbers as you possibly can. And then you have to have rough calculations for how much it has cost you to produce your crop, and also where you want to position yourself in the marketplace and your location in the UK. So if you decide that you want a really top end, if you want to be like a really top end supplier and you want to be commanding the very best prices, you've got to have a really good, strong brand identity. And you've got to have everything that links with that, which is a whole other world. But your positioning in the market is really important, and you get to decide that. So if you want to be selling slightly more affordable stems in a more, I don't know, just in a more accessible style, then 100% you do that. If you want to go to the very top of the market and sell to the very best, you have to raise your game so that you match that, so that you are a supplier that they would look at and go, oh yeah, they're like me, I will buy from them. And also, obviously, your location in the UK or wherever you are in the world is also very important, because that will determine in part the prices that you can actually charge, regardless of what your cost of production is. If people will not pay the price that you want for it, you're going to have to revisit the figures. And you may find that selling retail is easier. I can't speak about this because I haven't done it yet, but I'm going to have a stab at it this year and see how I get on. It's certainly easier to find the customer price points with the retail. Now, some final reflections I've got on this, because I know it's such a huge topic. And when I got thinking about it, I really, really got thinking about it and what my attitude to pricing is going to be in 2026. And what I've realized is that, I cannot be benchmarking against the imports. That is very naughty, and it's also counterproductive. It's not sensible. My prices can't be dictated by what the imports cost. They can't be dictated even by stem length. This is an interesting one, because florists that use imports are very used to buying according to a stem length, and that buying attitude may well cross over into you, and they may expect to pay a lot less for a shorter stem length. Now, if you're happy with that, and lots of us have smaller stemmed flowers that can go off for bud vases, florists don't need 80 centimeters of stem all of the time. They just don't. And if they're doing bud vases or small displays for the table, then the shorter stems are absolutely perfect. But if you've grown a whole field of something at 80 centimeters, you're going to have to think very carefully whether you want to price it for 40 centimeters and sell it accordingly, or try and get the price for the longer stem length. And I also can't benchmark against what florists are used to paying, because, as I say, it's a system that it's not a system, it's a playing field that I am not playing on, and therefore it cannot cost the same amount of money. Now, it's not going to be easy. I do recognize this. I mean, florists are very used to and very comfortable with buying imports, and they're used to the prices that they pay. And they can probably rattle off all the prices of their most commonly purchased flowers without even thinking about it. A lot faster than I could rattle all my prices off. In fact, it's going to be really, really hard work. I make no bones about it. I'm going to have to push the very special features of my flowers, such as the hyper seasonality and the scarcity of some of them, the character, the beauty that they've got, the scent they've got, which is very helpful as a selling point, and the vase life, which, although this doesn't always matter to event florists, it is still an important consideration. And I'd like to say I'm going to be much more confident about saying my prices and not apologizing them and not offering explanations and definitely not discounting them. But that probably depends on how much HRT I have applied on me at the point when I have that conversation. So I may have to up my dose when it comes to actually getting into negotiations, because I want to work with wedding and event florists that are doing exceptional work, that have the budgets to offer their clients really beautiful and special and unique flowers. I have lots of fantastic florists around me, and I'm very excited about working with them this year. Their work is absolutely incredible, and I think there's no reason why my flowers can't be in those situations. I'm also going to be working very hard at making things as easy as possible for florists who buy from me this year. So the website is up and running. There's lots of different ways that they can contact me. I've made it as simple as I think I can possibly make. So they should hopefully have the confidence to know how to get in touch with me, to know that they'll get a speedy response and decent pricing, hopefully, and a consistent supply, and that I'm a good grower to buy from. And I guess if they don't, then they're not the right fit for me, or I have to revise my entire business model. So I'll keep you posted on that and update you. There are, as I said in the last episode, no shortcuts to pricing. Unfortunately, you've got to put the work in. You've got to collect your own data, understand your market. And one final thing, I think I'm going to say this. I wasn't sure whether I would say this or not. I think we need to think like a man, because I have never yet met a man who underprices, undervalues, or undersells his time. They don't apologize. They don't explain their prices. And if you've ever had a quote from a tradesman, you will know this. They know that if you don't use their service, somebody else will. They don't discount a boiler service just to get your business. Like your garage, or my garage certainly, does not say you can have these tires or shock absorbers for a little bit less because of X, Y, and Z. They just state their price, and you either pay or you don't. So I think sometimes I definitely need to take more of that sort of mindset, take that attitude, because other trades are doing it. And I don't want to undersell myself this year. And I don't want to be saying things like, I'm new, I'm only small. It's like, you're either a grower or you're not. like completely. I'm going to be owning it this year. I'm not going to apologize for the size of the plot. I'm not going to be saying I'm new anymore, or I probably will, to be honest, a couple of times, and then I'll kick myself, because that is irrelevant to the florist. They just want to know that you've got a fantastic product and it fits in with their budget. That's it. They don't need me putting myself down or playing the whole field down, because my garage would certainly never ever say this. They never ever say, oh, I'm new, I'm only a small garage. They're like, this is how much it costs, love, do you want it or not? We are growing wonderful things. I'm growing wonderful things. I'm sure you are growing wonderful things. They have value, they cost real money to produce, and we need to be pricing accordingly. We need to be brave and we need to be bold. Now, part 2 of this episode is the continuation of my plant profile series, and tonight I'm doing my very favorite one. I think one of my favorites, the Craspedia. This came out on number 6 on my most profitable list, purely because it was so desirable that my wedding and event florist bought practically every stem that I could produce. She absolutely loved them. So it wasn't down to me being very efficient and being price conscious and being quick. It was literally because she just took the entire lot. And that was really interesting to me. Now, I call them my little yellow golf balls on sticks, but they are not, unfortunately, the size of golf balls, although they are lovely yellow color. I managed to sell them in July, August, September, and then again in November. They are technically they're a half hardy annual, so I treated them as a tender. And although I found online that they're actually perennial if the weather is warm enough, so that was pretty interesting. I did get rid of the whole crop at the end of the year. I didn't think they would overwinter, but I guess if I had some protection, maybe they would have done. I'm not sure. They weren't very tall. Mine were about 50 centimeters tall, the actual stem with the flower head on it. At the base is this kind of just the basal foliage at the bottom. So I did cut the stems right down to the base to get a decent stem length on those. And they just have these really, really pretty, perfectly round yellow flowers on the top, on these lovely smooth straight stems that were super quick and easy to harvest. Now, they're popular with florists because they're super eye-catching. There's a long harvest window, so they can get them over a longer period of time. And for growers, they're super easy. They didn't need a lot of water. Mine certainly didn't. They didn't need any supporting, which is great because they didn't get any. And they can apparently be dried, so they've got a dual use there. And I didn't dry any of mine because I sold all of them, which is great because I didn't sell most of my dried flowers. But I have one Craspedia stem in the feed room, which still looks like it did on the field 6 months ago. So yes, they can be dried. And I didn't have any pest or disease issues with mine. Nothing landed on them. Nothing ate them. Absolutely nothing happened. They were pretty bomb-proof last year. I can't speak for the long vase life because I didn't hang on to any. They literally went as soon as they were ready to go. They were off. And I understand they go really well with all sorts of other things. But again, I didn't test this out because the whole lot just vanished. Now, the downsides to this is that they are not cut and come like all season long. They will have a finite number of stems, and I didn't record how many that was, so I don't know the answer to that. But best thing to do is grow them in successions like I do. I think I did 2 or 3 successions of those so that I just had a continuous flow. But even as we got into the autumn, the first batch were flowering again, and they all seemed to have the same number of stems length. So I wasn't finding that I was having shorter stems as the season went on. They all seemed to do about 50 centimeters. They've actually come, Craspedia, from Australia and New Zealand, and they can be found in all sorts of habitats over there. So they do like a well-drained soil. And the fact that they've got silvery leaves gives you a clue that they're okay in the heat. And mine certainly weren't bothered by the droughts last year. So I grew them for the very first time in 2025, and I did them plant them quite close together, and the leaves blocked out all the weeds underneath. As I say, I didn't stake them. They were very, very quick to harvest. And from what I remember, they were pretty easy to sow as well. They need light, so I think I put vermiculite, a very light sprinkling of vermiculite over the top of them. They only took a couple of weeks to germinate, and didn't require much watering, or rather mine didn't once they were in the ground. They were in a full sun location, so the plot gets all the sun from kind of lunchtime onwards right through to the evening. And they were, super easy to harvest. Now, what I'm going to do in 2026 is definitely try drying some in Kylie's room and growing an awful lot more than I did in 2025, because I think they are so popular, and I don't know whether they're going to be subject to any trends or not, but I'm pretty confident I could sell a lot more of them than I did last year. And also I would like to have some left over as well for drying and then possibly using over the winter or into the spring. I think they could look also really nice on a wreath as long as it's dry, it doesn't get wet. So I hope that's all been really helpful. If you haven't grown Craspedia before, I do recommend you give them a go. They're really so much fun, and they're just joyful to look at. Now it's Friday, so you know what I'm going to say. I'm going to wish you a wonderful weekend, and I hope you'll come back and join me for the next episode on Tuesday, where we will carry on. So that's it from me. All the very best.